honestly want to congratulate not just the presenters and organizers, but all of you in the room who really have committed to this agenda of evidence gathering, evidence sharing, and evidence influencing for the Nepal government. So let me just give yourselves a round of applause. Don't worry, please don't look at the agenda and think I'm going to talk for half an hour. I'm not. You all need to go home. So let me just say a few words, okay? Starting though, I used to live in London for many years. I used to take the underground, the oldest underground in the world, where, as Keith said, the train doesn't quite fit the platform. So for days and years I was hearing, "Come along, sir, mind the gap. There's a good fellow." And I've been doing that ever since, focusing on the gap. And I really want to emphasize just a few areas that relate to those gaps. I think that's what we've been doing these 2 days. I mean, we've been bringing evidence to bear on a whole range of real-life problems, but particularly those where there are continuing gaps in our knowledge. And gaps in our knowledge lead inexorably to bad choices, bad policy decisions, bad investments, or just inaction, not doing anything, because we don't have the evidence in front of us that compels us to change. So I think a common theme across the 2 days, which I'm really, really proud to have been part of, is the relevance of research. Not research because it's interesting, but because it matters, because it can, in some way or another, influence policy in Nepal or beyond Nepal, and the design and implementation of programs, and try and change practices and behaviors at the household level. As Professor West and Dr. Fanzo, Professor Fanzo, both said at the outset on yesterday morning, defining and understanding the links between agriculture, markets, diets, nutrition, health, yeah, it's complex. But my sense from these couple of days is that we're not letting that complexity lead to inaction. We are accepting that complexity doesn't mean impossibility. We can measure complexity. We can understand complexity. The solutions are not always simple, but that doesn't mean we can't make progress. And so I've been seeing and hearing a demonstrable willingness in this room to engage with that complexity and try and share our understanding across disciplines, across sectors, applying tools in ways that they haven't been used before, and to reach people and practices that maybe haven't received enough attention. So in this room we have an unusual community of evidence generators, so the producers of evidence and the consumers of evidence. And I think we really need to understand that this has been happening and how valuable that is. So just on the gaps, I'm just going to point to, from my perspective, a few of the not highlights, but things that I think we've shifted our attention to since the first of these symposia over these past 4 years. My sense, the first couple were very much focused at the ends of this pathway, at the production of food and child outcomes. And my sense is that we're shifting a little bit more towards the complex pathways that link them. What was a missing middle, we're gradually filling in with knowledge. And it's knowledge that addresses a whole range of really important issues. Post-harvest, there's a whole range of issues that we've put on the table relating to food safety, to aflatoxin and storage practices, understanding of management, but even market access, which is all part of the value chain post-harvest prior to consumption of food. Those are key links, and I think we are moving in the right direction. Still a lot to know, still a lot to learn, but what is going on between production and consumption is clearly something we are increasingly concerned about. Other dimensions beyond anthropometry. We haven't in past years focused on cognitive dimensions of nutrition. The importance of psychosocial stimulation, behaviors and choices that contribute to the overweight and obesity. We've been hearing about the snack food, the processed foods, the choices that drive those. We need to understand a lot more about the choices that drive the purchases that go on in marketplaces across rural Nepal, not just urban areas. How to assess program impact. We've moved from descriptive presentations in the first couple of years to associative, to association presentations, to much more focus and clarity on what we can consider to be causal and direction of and causality versus simple associations. But much more care has been taken. But we're understanding the complexity of multi-sector work. I think the implementers here in the room understand that. The complexity of implementing multi-sector policy, the policymakers in the room understand that. And the researchers are now finally understanding how hard it is to assess rigorously multi-sector actions and impacts on the ground. It's slow. It takes time, Rolf said more than once. We need to know so much more than just what was the condition before and after. We need to understand coverage, intensity of intervention, as Dr. Miller just said. We need to understand uptake and sustained adoption of new services, practices, technologies, and inputs. All of this requires much more care in study design to achieve the rigorous evidence that we're trying to generate. Dietary diversity, becoming an important facet of so much of what we do, but some of the questions that raised from the floor suggest that this is still an evolving metric. We're still not entirely sure how best to measure it or what it actually tells us and how predictive that is. Not associative, but how predictive it is of nutrition outcomes. We need to understand dose responses, how much change in diet diversity can achieve change in anthropometry or other kinds of outcomes. How much change in diet diversity actually matters physiologically, Rolf said, beyond statistically. These are things that we have to take on board. How much change is enough? And then, of course, markets. Dr. Shively's and Ganesh Tapa's presentation on roads generated a lot of interest. Roads, of course, aren't just roads. They are conduits of access to health services, to markets for both producers and consumers of food, and the conduit for new information. So we do need to understand, we are increasingly understanding how important access to markets are for all of those reasons, but how they serve as buffers to shocks, to seasonality, to production deficiencies, to other things that really matter. And if you're functionally landless, as we just realized, as we just heard, many of the most food insecure are, then the reliance on the market for food is huge, even in rural areas. Not just the functionally landless, everyone is heavily reliant on the market. We need to understand what are the entry points for influencing positive change through the markets, through prices, through the production, the diversity of supply on those markets, to counter seasonally and so on. Last couple, food safety. This is a big black box. Needs much more attention. It's not just about aflatoxin, as Dr. Kablan pointed out. We need a lot more, not just concrete information, not just on aflatoxins, there's countless mycotoxins, but also helminths and microbes and so on. And all of that links very directly with the microbiome, which is becoming an increasingly important space for research around nutrition. What we eat really does determine what we are, and what we eat sometimes eats us from the inside out. And we have to pay more attention to environmental enteropathy, the conditions in which we make food choices. And there are always trade-offs in food choices. There are trade-offs, as Dr. Fanzo pointed out, the carbon footprint. We need to understand trade-offs, if only because the irony that came to the table is that we want greater dietary diversity. We want people to consume more nutrient-rich nutrient-rich foods. Just so happens that producing more nutrient-rich foods tends to be more demanding of water, of income, of vaccines and pesticides, and they're susceptible to climate change and so on. So yes, great, we want to be promoting dietary diversity. There are trade-offs, and we have to understand how to manage those trade-offs to achieve our results. So finally, I think we are really well down the road of achieving our ultimate goal, which is translating science into actions at the policy and programmatic level, as well as in the communities. I think we're increasingly wanting to understand not just what should be done, but how do we do it? How do we actually achieve this in ways that translates from a policy in paper down to actual positive change, sustainable change at the household level. So the key in coming years going forward, research in this country, among the many young scientists in this room, is not just to generate more rigorous studies and more rigorous evidence, but to insist that that evidence be of direct use to programming and policy making, that we invest in the translational part of science so that studies don't just end up in journals, but are communicated effectively and in this kind of forum and beyond, but in ways that evidence gets to the people who can most make use of that. We can discuss more in coming years how to achieve that, but I think we're in that going down that direction nicely. So I'm just really proud to be part of this event for the past 4 years. Hopefully we'll see how many more years we can keep this going, but it's growing, it's becoming more dynamic. The engagement with the Nepali community is just fabulous. So thank you for inviting us here yet again, and look forward to seeing many of you again next year.